You are kneeling beside a body in a cave in what is now northern Iraq. The fire has gone out, you haven't slept. Your hands are raw from digging into cold stone and packed earth because there is no other way to do what you're doing. This is roughly 60,000 years ago, and the person you're burying was not a stranger. Archaeologists call this place Shanidar Cave. You'll understand why it matters in a moment, but first sit with the scene itself. No written language exists yet, no religion as you'd recognize one. And yet, here you are, exhausted, deliberately placing a body into the ground instead of simply walking away. Why would anyone bother? That question sounds almost naive today. Of course you'd bury someone you cared about. But strip away everything modern, every funeral custom, every religious framework, every social expectation about how grief is supposed to look, and the question gets sharper. In a world where every single calorie mattered, where every hour spent not hunting or gathering was an hour closer to starvation, digging a grave was not free. It cost time. It cost energy. It cost safety, kneeling exposed while predators moved somewhere in the dark beyond the firelight. You did it anyway. Why? The answer starts somewhere you wouldn't expect inside your own skull, using a discovery made less than 25 years ago. In 2003, neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA ran an experiment that seems almost too simple to matter. She had participants play a virtual ball-tossing game while lying in an fMRI scanner watching their brain activity in real time. Partway through, the other players actually just a computer program stopped passing them the ball. Nothing was said. No insult. Just quiet exclusion. The brain scans lit up in a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same region that activates during physical pain. Read that again. Being excluded from a pointless game with strangers triggered the same neural signature as a burn or a broken bone. Your brain, it turns out, was never built to distinguish clearly between social pain and physical pain. As far as your oldest neural circuitry is concerned, losing connection and losing tissue are close cousins. Now scale that up. A stub toe fades in minutes. What happens when the person your brain has spent years attaching to disappears permanently? That's only the first piece. The next one explains why losing a friend cost you far more than emotional discomfort. It cost you your actual odds of surviving the week. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar at the University of Oxford spent decades studying the size of human social groups, both modern and ancestral. His research produced what's now called Dunbar's number, roughly 150 people, is the practical upper limit of stable relationships. A human brain can maintain a figure that shows up again and again across tribal societies, military units, and even modern company org charts. But the number itself isn't the interesting part. What's interesting is why that ceiling exists at all. Dunbar's work suggests your brain evolved a hard cap on close relationships because maintaining a bond is expensive. It requires memory, trust, tracking reciprocal obligation, constant low-level social labor. You don't form deep bonds carelessly. You couldn't afford to, which means every one of those roughly 150 relationships was a resource, not in a cold transactional sense, in a completely literal survival sense. Your closest companions were extra eyes watching for danger while you slept, extra hands hauling meat back to camp, someone to share food with during a bad week on the unspoken understanding that you'd do the same for them during theirs. Losing a close companion wasn't just a hole in your heart, it was a hole in your defenses, a hole in your food security, a hole in the number of people who would notice and act if you didn't come back from a hunt. You've probably assumed without ever really examining it that prehistoric life was too brutal, too focused on raw survival for anything as tender as real friendship to matter much. That emotional bonds were a luxury your ancestors couldn't afford, a modern invention, layered on top of survival instincts sometime after agriculture city's comfort. That assumption has the causality exactly backwards. Friendship wasn't a luxury your ancestors added once survival got easier. Friendship was one of the primary technologies that made survival possible at all. A solitary human alone on the Pleistocene landscape was not a rugged individualist. He was, in almost every practical sense, already dead. The deep bonds Eisenberger's brain scans light up for, and Dunbar's number quietly measures, weren't decoration on top of survival. They were the operating system, which brings you back to that cave and the body and the exhausted person doing the digging. Archaeologists studying Shanidar found something unexpected around several of the burials there, soil samples containing unusually high concentrations of pollen clustered in patterns that don't occur naturally. The interpretation has been debated for decades whether flowers were deliberately placed or whether burrowing rodents dragged pollen-heavy plant matter into the site afterward. Even setting that specific detail aside, one fact isn't in dispute: someone dug through hard ground, at cost to place a body deliberately rather than abandon it. That decision alone tells you something no pollen grain needs to confirm. Now picture the days that came after. Not the burial itself, the morning after. One fewer set of eyes at the fire. One fewer person to split the work of tracking, trapping, defending the camp. And underneath that very practical loss, a quieter one, the specific texture of a particular relationship gone. The rhythm of a friendship that had taken years to build, that couldn't simply be replaced by adding a stranger to the group. There's a second site worth knowing about here because it shows this wasn't a one-time anomaly. At Sungir in what is now Russia, archaeologists uncovered a burial roughly 34,000 years old, containing two individuals, a young person and an adolescent, laid head-to-head, covered in thousands of painstakingly carved ivory beads. Each bead has been estimated to take an hour or more to produce by hand. Multiply that out, and the burial represents thousands of hours of collective labor, poured into marking two specific named losses. Thousands of hours, in a world where every hour was survival currency. Whoever organized that burial wasn't performing an empty gesture. They were making a statement in the only language available to them about exactly how much those two lives had been worth to the people left behind. Here's the twist that changes how you should think about your own grief. That ache you feel when a friendship ends through death distance or simply drifting apart was never an overreaction. It was never just emotional. Your brain is running software that is at least 60,000 years old. Software built in a world where losing a close companion was measurably dangerous, not merely sad. The intensity of the pain is not a bug. It's a fossil. A precise, working record of how much a bond like that used to be worth. Think about the last person you lost touch with. Not through any dramatic falling out, just the slow erosion of text that got shorter, then less frequent, then stopped. Modern life makes that kind of quiet loss so easy it barely registers as loss at all. There's no grave to dig, no absence at a fire to notice every single morning. The friendship just data. And that absence of ritual doesn't mean the wound is smaller. Your ancient wiring doesn't know the difference between a friend who died and a friend who simply stopped calling. Both register somewhere in that same ancient region of your brain as a resource quietly gone. You are not weak for how much a lost friendship still cost you years later at 3 a.m. for no obvious reason. You are running the exact same circuitry that made someone 60,000 years ago choose to spend a night digging into frozen ground rather than walk away. Consider too what this means for the friendships you still have. Dunbar's later research found that maintaining a close bond requires regular ongoing contact. His own estimates suggest that without consistent interaction, even strong friendships measurably decay within about 6 months. Not because the people involved stopped caring, but because the ancient bookkeeping system in your brains, the one built to track who's still reliably in your circle of roughly 150, quietly recalibrates when the signal goes quiet. The friend who fell off wasn't necessarily replaced by someone better. In a very real neurological sense, they were slowly reclassified as no longer part of your survival network at all. That reclassification is happening constantly, silently all around you every time a conversation goes unanswered for long enough. That person in the cave wasn't performing an act of primitive sentiment. They were doing something your own brain still recognizes in its oldest and most literal language as completely rational, marking the loss of something that had once kept them alive.